Now, in the aftermath of the bombing for the United States has attacked into Iraq and into Syria against the people that we say killed American troops about a week ago, it's now time to take a look at the first battle damage assessment to see exactly what's happened so far as we can piece together and to kind of give you an idea of the so what, the implications of it. I'm sure if you've been watching any news at all, you've been seeing a lot of videotape that have been coming around. You've been seeing a lot of experts talk about this or that. But like we always love to do on this show, we're going to give you the bottom line of what's important, and we're going to go into a deep dive on it to tell you what really matters and what you can count on or what you can expect in the next phase. For this video here, we're going to look at it two separate directions. First, we're going to look at what a lot of the mainstream people are saying. It's like 90% of the so-called experts out there that are saying, and you need to understand, and one of the reasons I love this show and so grateful for the opportunity is because when you see a lot of these guys now, a lot of people, when they see a four-star general, they think, well, I mean, he must be right. He's a four-star general. And you don't get that. They don't just hand those out. You have to earn them. That's the way it should be, but definitely that's not the way it is because you have to look at their track record. I'm going to show you and tell you what's underneath what they're saying that they're not telling you that has a significant impact on what we should and should not do going forward. Then in the last part of the video, we're going to bring in one of our go-to sources, former CIA officer and one of my fellows at Defense Priorities, Mike Domino, one of the absolute best an analyst out there, an intel analyst, what he used to be. And he's got some great insights and also will tell us kind of what he thinks about where this is going to go. We recorded an interview earlier today. We'll play that toward the end here. But first of all, let's take a look at what so many of these so-called experts that so many networks always run to get some information about what the implications of this are. So very briefly as a setup, before I show you the first one, so far President Biden has ordered a fairly sizable strikes. Gary, if you could put that map up that we had a second ago that shows where these were. There were 7 locations in Iraq and in Syria where we have hit a bunch of logistics locations, command and control centers, storage facilities, drone storage facilities in one specific case, those kinds of things. That's what's been hit there. There have been a fairly limited number of casualties so far. Mike will actually talk about that shortly. But that's been phase one. And the White House has been emphatic to say this is the beginning. It is not the end. There's going to be more. So a lot of the television channels went to the regular experts, the general officers, the retired guys to say, what does all this mean? And of course, one of the first ones that always gets sent to is David Petraeus.
If I were advising, on the target option list would be targets in Iran, without question. It's just, I'm not certain that this is when you want to begin those targets.
Okay, so he's not sure if you want to wait till the second, but he's saying, yep, we definitely need to go into Iran. Now, I'm going to tell you in a minute why that's a big mistake, but let me show you a couple of other folks who want to make an even bigger one.
I just hope that this is comprehensive and sustained, and we get some positive, real results out of this thing. And I wish they would change their policy in dealing with the IRGC. Listen, are there some IRGC capabilities in the region? Yes, but they're very limited. They have some folks that are working, as advisors with the proxy, and leaders go in and out from time to time. But their real capability is in Iran, and that's where we should be.
And in case that wasn't strong enough, former acting Secretary of Defense in the Trump administration, Miller, had an even stronger view.
When you take B-1 bombers and fly them halfway across the world, that's a pretty strong signal. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but it's all about follow through. And the Iranians have to get the message that they cannot kill American soldiers. Do you realize this is the first time since the Korean War, over 70 years ago, that American soldiers have been killed overseas by an enemy air attack? This is a transformation of war that I don't think the American public completely understands yet.
Okay, that is just utter nonsense on the face of it. Transformative of war, a drone attack killed American troops. I mean, has he not noticed this little thing not far away from there called the Russian-Ukraine war, where drones ruled the skies, or the 2020 war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, where that's where it was even first really used on a large scale? Transformative? I mean, that's just nonsense. And look, let me just cut underneath that and tell you what he's trying to do. I'm going to interpret that. All he's trying to do is say, oh my God, this is a huge deal, and you need to support even more of these attacks. You need to go further, and we need to go into Iran so that they get the message. And I'm almost getting nauseous when I keep hearing that phrase by all these experts about the message that Iran is supposed to get. Because here's the point about this. None of these guys say what is the purpose of these strikes. What are they supposed to accomplish other than to get Iran to back down? Now, let me specify. They don't answer the attainable military objective outcome. They do talk about what they prefer, what they hope happens, which is that Iran gets the message, as Miller just said there, and that they stop, that they don't do anything further, or that Keane says, it needs to be a sustainable. So they get the message that it's a lot of firepower. We're going to be hitting them a lot of times, and then they'll get the message and stand down. That's what all of these people want to happen. Now, whether that's the administration's objective or not, we don't know, because frankly, they haven't told us, which is another problem. If they're using firepower against targets in response to an attack on American forces, it should be an obligation that's what a democracy does, where they tell the people whose name that they're governing in, whose name that they're launching missiles in, that's your name, by the way, that they tell you what they're trying to accomplish. Now, I think one of the reasons they don't, we've seen this for a long time now, because they don't want to be held to it. So if it doesn't work, if they say, hey, we're going to achieve X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z aren't achieved, then people can rationally go back and say, hey, you told us this, but it didn't happen. So your operations were a failure. So to prevent that from happening, they just give these ethereal kinds of generalities, like they want a message to be received or so. And now it's much harder to say, well, did they get the message? Because look, a message is only received in your mind. It only matters the mind of the receiver. What did they receive? What has Iran received? Well, let's actually take a look at that. This is a quote earlier from the Iranian president, who sends another warning. And I believe this was yesterday before the bombs fell, if I'm not mistaken, but it doesn't matter because it still stands. This is what he says if his people are attacked.
جنگی رو آغاز نخواهیم کرد، اما اگر کشوری، اگر نیروی ظالمی قلدری بخواد قلدری بکنه، جمهوری اسلامی ایران جواب او رو جواب محکمی خواهد داد.
Now, look, I know a lot of people will want to dismiss that and say, oh, he's just talking tough, but he won't actually do anything. Really? You think that's what the Iranians will do? People who say that, and a lot of them are Miller, Keane, Lindsey Graham, some of these other, folks that have keep saying hit Iran hard. That's what they want to happen. They want him to get the message and stand down. They don't care if he talks and whatever, makes all these boisterous sayings, but they think he won't do anything. Now, another thing that kind of makes me nauseous, and I've heard it a lot in this current phase, is where some of these experts go on there and say, look what Trump did. Trump assassinated Soleimani, their general, and they did nothing in response. They backed him down. We need to do that again. Okay, a quick review of the record. This is CENTCOM video that shows what Iran did do in the aftermath of that assassination. They said they would vow revenge, and that's exactly what it did. This is a U.S. drone footage of our own base with pinpoint strikes from the Iranian regime onto our targets. And if you wanted to see what that did on the ground, here's just a quick picture of that. Gary, if you can throw that picture up of the ground attack. That's one of the aftermath of one of the buildings. Does that look like nothing to you? Does that look like a tepid response? There were over 100 Americans wounded in there. And based on an interviews with the troops on the ground who endured it, they said it was a miracle from God that no one was killed, because they said there should have been a lot. Had that happened, then we probably would already have gone to war with Iran, because Trump did nothing in response after this happened. Our base got the hell kicked out of it. You see that picture there. There was a number of strikes that happened. That's just one of the photographs here. That whole facility was wiped out. We did nothing in response to that. And Iran didn't ramp up anything big, but they did. There were over 80 of these attacks against our troops in Iraq and in Syria over the next 2 years. They did not back down. They didn't back down then. And in recent days, they have even escalated above that by attacking targets against their personnel in Iraq, in Syria, and in Pakistan in just recent days even. They are not in a mood to back down. They have shown they won't. The Houthis in Yemen, I think it's 9 levels of strikes now against targets in Yemen. They haven't stopped either. So there should be no expectation. And by the way, the 15 rounds of strikes that we did in Iraq and in Syria prior to our troops getting killed there clearly did not deter anybody. So again, I have to ask the leadership of our country, what is the plan? What is the objective? And especially, what next? What are you going to do now? Because what if Iran isn't deterred? What if they keep supporting these Iran-backed groups? And by the way, these Iran-backed groups are not like puppets on a string they're just appendages of Iran. They're backed by Iran, but they're mainly independent actors. And I'm sure, I'll tell you, Iran wishes they had more tactical control, but they don't. These people are going to do whatever they are going to do on their own, because their reason they're doing this, all of this, folks, gets tied back to the Israel-Hamas war. Whether anybody likes to talk about that or not, that's a fact. Every single one of these attacks always cite the killing of the Palestinian people, their Arab co-religionists in Palestine, because of this. They even the attacks on our troops here, the Kataib Hezbollah said that if the attacks on the Palestinians stop, so will they. That's what they have said. This directly tied to that. Everything in the Red Sea, 100%, is expressly tied only to the Israeli war and Hamas. So this is not coming out of nowhere. Ergo, it's not going to stop, because the reason they're doing it is not because they want to attack America. It's because they're fighting in defense of their Arab brothers in Pakistan. I'm sorry, Palestine, in Gaza. So if you don't deal with that, just throwing a bunch of bombs at them is not going to stop them here. And if we do what these 3 people we just showed here a minute ago, and we escalate into Iran proper, which, you know, there's lots more than these 3. A lot of on Capitol Hill are saying the same thing. Folks, that's when you get the probability, not even a possibility, but a probability of a regional war. And I'm just telling you that is not in America's interest at all. And now I want to go into a little bit more depth on that. And we're going to bring in here Mike Domino, who is a former CIA officer and a fellow at Defense Priorities, and is really tied into the intelligence community, has lots of sources out there. And I'm going to show you something that we talked about him a little bit earlier this afternoon, and he spoke specifically about things that happen on the ground and what comes next. I'm going to put up first here a map of the area here. If you can kind of talk us through, you know, what we're seeing on the map here. What were these places in, and what about these stand out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is these are the 7 locations that U.S. airstrikes targeted in Iraq and Syria last night, and there were 85 different targets, according to CENTCOM, that were hit across these 7 sites. And what's notable is that most of them, you'll see, are pretty close to that Syria-Iraq border area, in the Syrian Badia, or sort of the desert there in the south as well. And this area is really critical for these Iran-backed Shia militia groups for transiting personnel, equipment, weapons back and forth between Iraq and Syria. So these areas like Mayadeen, Bukamal, and Al-Qaim are really important to the group. So it does make sense, like we talked about earlier in the week, that these kinds of targets would be on the deck as initial U.S. strikes. Obviously, continued U.S. strikes are not necessarily going to be limited to these locations, but this is roughly what we saw last night, Danny.
And what do we think is the intent of these, if you can even speak to that right there? So, I mean, based on what you've seen here, and I think I've seen a number of statements from some American officials claiming that this is going to deter these groups, or it's going to at least impact their ability to operate. Let me ask you first on the aspect of deterrence. Do you think that these strikes, and the assumption is this is only the beginning of this current campaign or round, so look, not just this one, but let's say when this current round is over, will it deter these groups from further action?
Well, I think even in the early hours of this Saturday morning, Danny, we're kind of learning that that's not really going to happen. We saw a statement from the from Akram Al-Kabi, who is the head of the Al-Nujaba militia in Iraq. You're seeing it there on your screen now. And this was put out this morning after the U.S. airstrikes last night, where he is committing that his forces are going to continue to attack U.S. troops, and they're going to continue fighting. And now this is interesting too, because we saw a few days ago, kind of some swirl, some rumor about a Kataib Hezbollah, which is a separate Shia militia group in Iraq, issuing a stand-down order to not continue attacks on U.S. troops. But now you have other militias that are saying the opposite. So again, this underscores, I know people get very heated about this issue, but it does underscore that Iran, even though it provides a lot of support to these groups, it does not have tactical level command and control of every little decision that these groups make. So
and by the way, I think I saw this morning, just before we started making this recording here, that actually Kataib Hezbollah has rescinded that order now, and they say now that they're going to be going back to active attacks. Have you seen anything to that regard?
So I haven't, but that tracks with this statement from Al-Nujaba that we have that I have seen, and it does track with the general sentiment, I think, of a lot of these groups in Iraq and Syria that they are going to continue to attack U.S. troops as long as U.S. troops are there. And it doesn't necessarily matter what the Iranians say. And so, I think we're going to see more already this morning. There have been reports of attacks on the U.S. base in Al-Harir. There have been reports of additional attacks on the U.S. facility at Atanf in the Syrian Badia as well. So, I think we have every indication just hours after the strikes, Danny, that these attacks are going to continue.
And so, the second part of that, what about their capability? So the claim is that these attacks are going to impair their ability to attack. Now, of course, if these missiles were on target, and I think we actually have some video here that shows some of the results.
This morning, obviously, bulldozers are going ahead and clearing a lot of the area of a PMF headquarters and facility in Anbar, and you're seeing more pictures of that video now. That was all taken this morning in Iraq, and this shows you kind of, if we're going to do kind of just a quick little BDA, a little battle damage assessment for folks. I mean, these are pretty devastating strikes. I mean, these entire buildings have been pulverized right into concrete, into dust, basically. So I think we are seeing some good effects on the targets themselves, as far as the buildings or whatever kind of equipment was there. CENTCOM said that they hit a couple of intelligence facilities and support facilities, weapon storage facilities, and things like that. So I think that's all accurate. I think the bigger question is, to your point, Danny, right? Is that really going to have an effect on their capabilities militarily? I think that really remains.
Sorry, Michael. Let me ask you this. So on top of that, so these were, I think, those 85 targets that were serviced by the 125 rounds so far. And as we saw in that video and pic there, it's obviously everything hit was harmed. But what I think I saw yesterday, and now I'm a little fuzzy on if this is accurate or not, so I'm hoping that you can clarify. But I heard that there were literally tens of thousands of these various fighters spread throughout this region. So the idea that these 85 are going to cause any serious operational limitation to their capacity seems pretty low. It seems like it would have to be a whole lot more than that, even at the tactical level. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, Danny. I think because these strikes were so telegraphed in advance, and I understand that some people are arguing that the administration may have been doing that on purpose to try to de-escalate, or it may just have been very leaky. I mean, this administration has had leaks like this before. There were leaks before the January 11th strike on the Houthis. So because this was so telegraphed in advance, a lot of the more significant targets that you could have taken off the battlefield were not removed from the battlefield. So a lot of the senior level IRGC commanders in Iraq and Syria fled back to Iran. And the guys on the ground, even the rank and file, have had plenty of time to evacuate a lot of these bases. And some of the folks that I've been talking to, including some sources that know Eastern Syria very well, informed me last night that many of these sites were quite literally empty at the time that some of these U.S. strikes went off. So it may affect, some of these facilities. I don't doubt that. It looks like we had some good effects on the static targets, right? No one's denying that. But yes, I think that as far as effects on any kind of senior leadership, we have not seen any reports of any high-value targets killed. The one thing that I have seen was this gentleman right here, Abbas al-Daraji, who is a mid-level PMF logistics commander. It's reported that he was one of the casualties last night. That is still not entirely confirmed, but there are significant reports out that he was one of the casualties. As far as casualties, we've seen a couple dozen and a couple dozen more wounded. Obviously, this early, those casualty figures are going to go up, down, sideways. I mean, this is how it goes in the immediate hours after strikes. So we don't really know. We do know that the PMF was hit quite heavily, and you showed those pictures of the facilities in Anbar. And the PMF, as we've talked about on your show before, Danny, they are a official security force of the Iraqi government. They are official paramilitaries of the Iraqi government. They are fully integrated with the Iraqi government, with Iraqi security services. And we are currently trying to
hang on. These guys, this PMF that we just attacked because we say that they were related to the troops, people that killed our troops, are actually official elements of the Iraqi security force and sanctioned by their government, which we have now killed so far, and apparently more is to come, while we're also staying there at the invitation of the Iraqi government. That seems kind of weird.
I think you outlined it perfectly right there, Danny. That is the vicious cycle and the total schizophrenia. I just don't know any other word for it for U.S. policy in Iraq. It just doesn't make any sense. So, without getting too into the history, these Shia militia groups were very instrumental in the defeat of ISIS in Iraq, and the Iraqi army regulars famously turned tail and ran and gave up the fight. So these guys were very critical in defeating ISIS. And then at the end of that conflict, the Iraqi government had no option basically other than to give these guys some form of legitimacy, some form of recognition, because they did a lot of the wet work, as we like to say. So now we're stuck in this weird position where the PMF is working with a lot of these Shia militia groups and is integrated with a lot of these Shia militia groups while being attached to the Iraqi government, which are attacking U.S. troops. And so, that's why, as we've talked about before, Danny, I think we need to fundamentally rethink our force posture and presence in the region. And I'm not saying that we need to,
like by 7 o'clock today would be great. Let's get that done. Start moving out. But hey, listen, in the last couple of minutes we have here, I definitely don't want you to be able to leave before we get these important things covered here. One is, what do you see as the next round, or even how do you see the rest of this so-called campaign over the next number of days playing out? What do you think the U.S. will go after second? And then probably the most important question following that is, then what do we expect the response to be from the region, from these fighters?
Yeah, so I think what we'll see are continued U.S. airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. I don't foresee this administration going out and hitting Iran. I think that is fairly clear. But we have heard a lot about this multi-tiered, multi-phase response. So I would expect, more U.S. airstrikes, potentially even later this evening and the rest of this weekend. I think we'll see more U.S. airstrikes into next week as well. And then some of the other things we might not hear as much about, right? Things that would leverage intelligence capabilities, cyber attacks, other things like that, I would assume are going on in the background as well. And I think, look, we already saw, as of this morning, a few attacks on U.S. bases. We've seen these Shia militia groups in Iraq signaling their resolve and saying that they're not going to back down. And so I think we will see more attacks on U.S. bases. And then I think the big question is, like we talked about on your show last week, will Iran dig into their large arsenal of thousands of short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles, and will they use those to conduct an attack on U.S. forces? I'm not certain of that. I think it is plausible if the U.S. continues to hit sensitive IRGC targets or senior leaders. But again, a lot of those targets and leaders are not in Iraq and Syria at the moment because of how much advance notice was given on a lot of these strikes.
See, I wonder if the last question here I can get you to talk on before we let you go. I have been reading a lot of things in the open source media that, on the American side, you have like Jack Keane, Lindsey Graham, this Senator Wicker, I think his name is, that are all saying, we should go more, we should attack more, we get into Iran. That's the real core of the issue here. On the other side of that, in Iran, they have their versions of it that are already getting aggravated at their government for not responding heavily enough, which would seem to put pressure on the Ayatollah, even though people think that that's not the case, that they can't be. But to say, hey, you guys need to step up because you're not strong enough and you're being bullied by the United States and we want to see more action. Have you heard anything about that from any of your sources?
I haven't. There have been discussions, obviously, on, at what point. It feels like we have this discussion every couple of years, internal uprisings and sort of tension in Iran, and may that lead to something or not or whatever. But I think the biggest point there that I would make is, look, if the Iranian people are ready to sort of push the regime in one way or the other, that's a question for them to resolve. And I think we've seen over the last 20 years that any kind of U.S. involvement in something like that, even though it may feel good or it may seem like something we can, morally feel nice about, it's just not going to go well. And if anything, it's just going to make things worse. So I would say that anything related to the Iranian government, it's gotta be internal. It's gotta be organic. And everything we've done in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan over the past 20 years, I think has demonstrated that.
Yeah, that's bringing up those examples is not giving me a lot of confidence that we're going to be able to navigate this one in a way that's going to produce a better environment, a safer, less threatening environment for America. I fear that it's going to go in the opposite direction. And we really appreciate Mike Domino coming on earlier today. And I'm telling you, he's really got some good insights here. Bottom line is this remains a very volatile influx situation, and we're going to continue to bring you all the analysis that you need so you can understand what's going on, and you can have a pretty good idea, better than most people who are watching conventional media are going to have. And we appreciate you guys a whole lot. We are in this together, folks. We're in this with you because we view things the same way that a lot of you do. And we're grateful for the opportunity to share the truth with you. You're going to want to tune in next week, folks, because we got some other great shows that we're going to have. We have Matthew Ho, favorite of this show for obvious reasons, because he always has some really good insights. And Ambassador Chaz Freeman is going to be back. So on Monday and Tuesday, you're not going to want to miss those shows. Keep watching our channels. We'll promo it so that you'll see when it's coming up. You're not going to want to miss it. Thanks. Be sure to like and subscribe, because we are always unintimidated and uncompromised in bringing you the information you need on the hottest issues around the world right now. And we're going to continue doing that for you. Thanks. And we'll see you next week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.